Goodman. Real estate mogul Donald Trump has formally accepted the Republican presidential nomination. In his hour and 15-minute speech, Trump portrayed the U.S. as a nation humiliated abroad and under threat at home.
Our convention occurs at a moment of crisis for our nation. The attacks on our police and the terrorism of our cities threaten our very way of life. Any politician who does not grasp this danger is not fit to lead our country. Americans watching this address tonight have seen the recent images of violence in our streets and the chaos in our communities. Many have witnessed this violence personally. Some have even been its victims. I have a message for all of you. The crime and violence that today afflicts our nation will soon, and I mean very soon, come to an end. Beginning on January 20th of 2017, safety will be restored.
Donald Trump repeatedly claimed the nation's security is under threats thanks to undocumented immigrants.
The number of new illegal immigrant families who have crossed the border so far this year already exceeds the entire total from 2015. They are being released by the tens of thousands into our communities with no regard for the impact on public safety or resources.
Donald Trump also vowed to be the voice of workers impacted by unfair trade deals.
Every day, I wake up determined to deliver a better life for the people all across this nation that have been ignored, neglected, and abandoned. I have visited the laid-off factory workers and the communities crushed by our horrible and unfair trade deals. These are the forgotten men and women of our country, and they are forgotten, but they're not going to be forgotten long. These are people who work hard, but no longer have a voice. I am your voice.
Code Pink's Medea Benjamin disrupted Trump's speech last night, holding a banner reading, "Build bridges, not walls." Her protest diverted cameras away from Trump's speech. Medea was removed after the disruption. She says she was later interviewed by Secret Service. Democracy Now! Spoke to her on the street afterwards.
Read the speech beforehand, so I knew exactly when I wanted to interrupt, when he said, "I am your voice." And I wanted to get up then and say, "You are not my voice. Your voice is one of hatred and is anti-immigrant sentiment and Islamophobia and misogyny, and we need someone who will build bridges, not walls."
Donald Trump's speech included multiple factual errors. According to the Washington Post, the speech was, quote, "a compendium of doomsday stats that fall apart upon close scrutiny. Numbers are taken out of context, data manipulated, and sometimes the facts are wrong," the Washington Post said. The Guardian reported, quote, "comparisons with Hitler and Mussolini have been made so often and so glibly that they tend to obscure rather than clarify. Yet the ability of this demagogue to play the crowd, switching its anger on and off like a tap, carries too many echoes of the past century to ignore," the Guardian wrote. Meanwhile, Ku Klux Klan Grand Wizard David Duke praised the speech. In a tweet, he wrote, quote, "Great Trump speech, America first, stop wars, defeat the corrupt elites, protect our borders, fair trade, couldn't have said it better," he tweeted. We're joined now by three guests. David K. Johnston is a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative reporter. His new book, The Making of Donald Trump, comes out in August. Jamil Smith, senior national correspondent at MTV News, is with us here in Cleveland, where he comes from. And Vincent Warren is executive director of the Center for Constitutional Rights. He's joining us from New York. We welcome you all to Democracy Now! I want to begin with Jamil Smith. This is your hometown. Your family works at the Q at the Quicken Loans Arena. You were inside covering it. Your thoughts on Donald Trump's speech?
My thoughts is it's the classic authoritarian stuff. I mean, you see a guy rallying up a crowd, really offering no solutions. There's no how in that speech. There's no explanation for how he's going to make America more secure or how he's going to close the borders or how any of that stuff is actually going to get done. Everyone chanting, build a wall. Well, how are you going to do it? So if you're really going to be taken seriously as president, I don't know really if that was the goal. The goal was simply to get his constituency as angry and as riled up as possible and ready for November.
Not just build a wall. Many chants continued last night, as they did from the days before. Yeah. Lock her up. Lock her up.
Right. And, and that's one of the themes, of course, early on in the convention was relitigating Benghazi. And so they were trying to re-examine something that's already been examined at great length in Senate hearings, through the media. Really, it's been, investigated by the FBI. This is something that has been looked into. And yet they have been trained to disbelieve the FBI, to disbelieve anybody who tells them something else that Donald Trump is not telling them.
David K. Johnston, author of the forthcoming book, The Making of Donald Trump. Your thoughts on his speech last night?
Well, the purpose of a speech when you accept the nomination is to reach out and get people who are undecided or can be swayed to come to you. Donald gave a speech designed entirely to appeal to the almost entirely white audience in that room that is fearful of the changes taking place in America. He came up with lines that are designed to make you think that there's terror in the streets. In fact, killings of police officers are down slightly this year, despite the two despicable assassinations in Dallas and Baton Rouge. The murder rate in this country is well below half what it was 35 years ago. The burglary rate is down similarly. None of these things actually exist, and Jamil is exactly right. Donald had no how there. It was simply the great and all-powerful Donald will make these things disappear, most of which, by the way, have nothing to do with the federal government and the executive under our Constitution.
What do you mean by that?
Well, the local law enforcement is responsible for things like crime in the streets, if you think it's rampant, which it is not, except in very selected areas that we are having problems with, usually connected with drug wars. The issues that Donald talks about, he's going to there will be safety and security starting January 20th. How? You're going to move your magic wand and suddenly crime will stop? I mean, this is nonsense, absolute nonsense. And if you think there is a problem, then let's be specific. Implied in what Donald has said last night, is a massive increase in government spending, in taxes that will have to go to pay for law enforcement, to lock people up, for judges, unless Donald wants to dispense with judicial practice and due process and simply round up people he doesn't like. That would be less expensive in the short run. It would destroy the country in the long run.
Vince Warren, head of the Center for Constitutional Rights, your response.
Yeah. If you were looking for a perfect intersection between structural racism and abusive state power, the only place you have to look is the 1 hour and 15 minutes of that speech. We've been thinking a lot about the question of how the state apparatus, and particularly the security apparatus, expands. And there are really three pieces that we've been seeing over the past 8 years, all of which were in this speech. One is that there's the criminalization and racialization narratives of communities. Two, that there is a narrative of an internal threat that somehow justifies the expansion of law enforcement power. And three, that you rationalize the expansion of power through what looks like rational discourse. And, I think this is going to go down as the Gotham City speech, because in his speech, all there was doom, there was gloom, there was destruction, there was rampant terrorism that was happening. But all of it, the message to communities of color was to buckle up, because if Donald Trump becomes president, he's coming for you. And if you think about how the criminal narratives were braided, black people were portrayed as criminal people, Muslims were portrayed as terrorists, immigrants were portrayed as criminals and terrorists. This is the kind of rhetoric that gets braided together, even in the context of this speech, where he went fluidly from talking about internal crime in the inner city, to talking about Muslim terrorists internationally, to talk about shooters here in the U.S. The whole idea of this speech is to galvanize people around the idea that there's a threat internally, which of course factually there isn't, and that only requires a greater law enforcement response. I think what we're looking at, if this thing moves forward, is an increased security state that's going to be growing by leaps and bounds, and not incrementally as it has been over the past 12 years.
We're going to break, then come back to this discussion with our three guests. We're joined by Jamil Smith of MTV, also Vince Warren of the Center for Constitutional Rights, and David K. Johnston, author of the forthcoming The Making of Donald Trump. This is Democracy Now!